Lighthouse kids. We're going to get back to our story from the biggest story ever. It's taken from the whole Bible. We're going to go through the whole Bible in 10 lessons. So that's moving pretty quickly, but we're looking at the big picture, the biggest story, which is about needing a rescuer, a deliverer. It's about God and what He does for us. It's His story. So we've looked at a lot of different Bible characters as God's telling His story through all of them. We started with Adam and Eve, and then we went on to Noah, and we saw how God rescued and saved, and we saw how people kept sinning, Adam and Eve, right? And even their sons, Cain and Abel. Noah wasn't perfect. Then we got to Abraham, and God called Abraham out of nowhere for no apparent reason. Abraham didn't know who God was, but God called him and made huge promises to him. And we've been following God's promises all the way through. And we learned about Joseph last week, and God bringing His chosen people Israel out of slavery. And we're going to keep looking at Israel this week as we talk about Moses. Now, when we talk about Moses was responsible for writing the first 5 books of the Old Testament: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. And then Joshua takes over, and then we get into the Kings. We'll see about that next week. But we're tracing God's promises. And part of God's promises is to be our God, and that we would be His people. And in order to do that well, He wants to show us more about Himself so that we can show Him to the nations around us. So God gave special rules. Do we like rules? No, not really. Okay, well, maybe we'll see how good they are by the end of the lesson. But God gave a lot of rules to Moses and in those first 5 books of the Old Testament. So we're going to get into maybe some of the reasons why. Why did He give the rules, and what are they about? So let's read the story. It was a very good thing God was always rescuing His people, because it seemed that no matter how many times God saved His people, the Israelites were never quite safe from themselves. See, after God delivered His people from Egypt, He gave them a lot of commandments. Well, this wasn't to punish them, but to help them and protect them. They were good commandments, and if they obeyed the commandments, God's people would be blessed. There would be food and children and long life and protection and even a new home. It would be just like they were in paradise again. That's where God wanted to lead them all along, back to the garden. But if they didn't obey, there would be curses, just like the ones that fell on Adam and Eve and the serpent. As you might have guessed, the people didn't do so well in obeying God's commands. After Moses and his helper Joshua died, they disobeyed even more. They ignored the most important commands, and when they did work hard at some rules, like getting the sacrifices right, they didn't really obey those rules from the heart. They just checked them off a list and forgot about the more important commands. Well, not that God's people deserved it, but God finally gave them their promised land. God did the work to get them in, but God's people didn't do the work of driving everyone else out. This caused a lot of trouble for the Israelites. They constantly had enemies to fight. And worse, they constantly had to fight the temptation to be just like their enemies. Sometimes things would go well for Israel when they had a good leader and when they obeyed.
Holy you are, perfect and pure you are, everything right you are, yes you are.
But most often things went poorly.
Broken am I, full of discord am I, holy.
I couldn't take control. So I was just chilling in my robot clothes with my robot friends and my robot flows, living robot ways, cause that's all I know. Till I heard I could go this song.
Hey, Mom said you aren't allowed eating those. Oh, it's goody two-shoes.
Yes, sir. Come on. Yeah. Yes, sir. Come on.
God gave the Israelites rules, but they didn't follow them. And God made his dwelling among them, but they didn't act like they wanted him to stick around. God sent prophets, but Israel didn't listen. God provided priests, but the priests didn't know how to be holy. Later, God gave them kings, but the kings were a royal pain. Israel was a mess. Of course, God still had his promises to keep, but most days it was hard to imagine how anyone could save this stubborn people. It would have been even harder to imagine how the promised man could come from among this people. One day, Jesus was asked, "What was the greatest commandment, Jesus?" And it's a fine question if you feel like maybe 10 is too many and you just want to go for try to keep the best ones. And so what do you think Jesus' answer to the question was? Well, he gave an answer. He's told the people who are asking what the greatest commandment is, and he said there's another one that is just like it. And he said, if you keep these 2 commandments, it's the same as keeping all of them. What? So what do you think Jesus' answer was? The 2 greatest commandments. Well, for that, we're going to go to the quiz man.
Alright, wouldn't it be great if your parents had just 2 rules? 2 rules over all the rules. Like the two greatest commandments. So, what are the 2 greatest commandments? Is it A, brush your teeth and eat your veggies? Or maybe you should do the other order. Maybe you should eat your veggies and then brush your teeth so your breath doesn't smell like cauliflower. Alright. Or is it B, stay active but stay apart? I got it. Or C, do not taste and do not touch. That was in today's sermon. Alright, and finally D, is it love the Lord with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself? Alright, and for the answer. Moses gave us the 10 commandments, and Jesus said that you can do them all in just 2 commandments, and that's D, love God and love others. If you guessed D, that's right. Good job. Alright, and I'm the quiz man. See you next time.
Is love an easy rule to keep? Well, love requires sacrifice. It means putting yourself second or third or fourth above everybody else around you. And it means committing your whole heart and your whole life, not just when it's easy or convenient for you or when you've got time, but giving everything you have to love God and serve God. And that is not easy. So then, what's the good news? If love is hard, even when we like the idea of it, well, we love the idea of love, but if it's so hard, what do? What's the good news? And for that, we're going to the gospel poster. You remember what the gospel poster says, don't you? Well, I've got some friends again to help us. Let's do it.
God rules, we sin, God provided, Jesus gives, we respond.
Let's think about those last 2 for just a second here, because it says Jesus gives. And Jesus gives us his perfect law keeping. He pleased God in every way and kept all the rules. Can you imagine? Wow. So that's what Jesus gives to us as a gift. So that's why we say Jesus gives. He gives us his perfect rule keeping. Wow. And so then, of course, what do? We say, we respond. We respond to what he wants to give us, and he gives us what we cannot do for ourselves. We cannot love perfectly, We can receive the perfect love of God for us and the sacrifice that He made for us. We can receive it and respond and say, wow, God, my life is yours. I don't have to earn it. Even following the rules. I know I'm going to mess up, but you didn't. You keep your promise. So take a moment to thank God and respond to Him with your family together. And we'll see you next week.
The love you've shown. This is my longest. This is my deepest, strongest plea. Oh, Lord, change me. Yeah. Oh, would you change?